Before going into the proper slides here, I would like you guys to know that history taking is utmost importance in every medical facilities. Like if you go as a medical practitioner or a surgeon or as anything which deals with medical college or a hospital, you should need a proper history taking. Even when you go as a microbiologist or you go as a radiologist, a proper history is very important. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what I would say. The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we just listen to reply. So most of the times, as a student myself, I've also done we get 15 minutes time, but those 15 minutes we don't listen to the patient. We want to finish the case at the earliest. We want to finish it and present the case to our seniors or our faculties, so that we are done with this and just we move out. But the problem we do here is we do not listen to the patient properly and we don't understand what they're saying. With just history taking, you can come to the diagnosis without even going for the examination part of it. So the history from the patient is very, 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 very important. And as you see, without the history taking, we cannot move forward to the examination part of any of the cases that we are going to deal with. So going to the history taking part, okay, this is utmost important, a very important thing. When you start with the history, don't directly go for your chief complaints or don't directly go for your presenting illness. First of all, identify the patient and introduce yourself. Say you are so and so and you are going to take the history and examine this patient for particular complaints. So the name of the patient, always talk to the patient as a patient and not deal them or not address them as a case. Don't say he's a case of CSOM, he's a case of deviated septum, he's a case of sinusitis. No, talk to the patient and address the patient as a person. So if the patient's name is, for example, Ramesh, you'll say, okay, Mr. Ramesh, I'm going to check you, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'm going to give the diagnosis. It's going to help me as well as you. So please identify the patient by their name and not by their disease. Number 2, age. Age is very, very important when it comes to history, because number 1, there are few diseases which are pertain only for pediatric age group. There are some diseases for adolescents, there are some diseases for adults and elderly. So with the age itself, so a 5-year-old kid is coming to you with a history of cold, the first thing which is going to come in your mind is, okay, fine, he is going to be a case of tonsillitis, or he's going to be a case of recurrent fever or ear pain. That child is not going to present you with bleeding from the nasal cavity, which has been there for many years or months, or he's not going to say he's a smoker and an alcoholic, so that you think about a malignancy here. So age determines what type of disease we are going to deal with, and the address the patient where he is coming from. Few areas are prone to few infections like malaria in some parts of the city, even in our parts of the city, even near Ramachandra, if I tell you, about 2-3 kilometers away from Ramachandra, interior into Ayappannagal and all those areas, there are a lot of areas which, when there is rain, there's a big swamp there. So a lot of mosquitoes dwell there. So that gives you an important, a knowledge about where this patient is coming from and what kind of diseases he can be having. Informant, either the patient is an informant, is the mother informant, is the father informant, or is somebody else's friends, grandparents, like neighbors, like I've put it here, are they the informant? The informant is important in taking history for a child, because a mother is the best history giver in case of a child, whereas in adults, the adults themselves can give unless and until they are mentally unstable. So if the informant is mother, please mention it, and it's a good reliable source. If the informant is grandparents, it's fair. And if the informant is a neighbor, it's a poor reliable source. You can't obtain much history from the neighbor. So always, if you get a patient with a child who's coming with a neighbor or grandparents, please ask them to bring the child again with the parents or at least with the mother, so that they will know more better than both the child than the grandparents or the neighbors. Okay, So this is called as a chronological data, and it has to be entered in every case. This is the first and foremost thing that you have to mention. If you forget the name, if you forget the age and sex of the patient, if you forget the location from where he is coming from, then we are in trouble. We expect everything to be there, and with this itself, we can start asking a lot of questions. For example, the patient is a Muslim patient, then they will ask, so what do you think this patient is coming from down south? So what do you think this patient might have? Can I take him up for surgery? So in southern parts of Tamil Nadu, few Muslim communities, they have bleeding dyscrasias, or during tonsillectomies we have seen they will keep on bleeding compared to others, similar to the um, the royal disease where the bleed is too much and they keep on bleeding. So that gives you the first idea about what kind of patient we are dealing with. There are some patients who belong to Chettiar community. They have bleeding tendencies. So we normally avoid surgeries in those patients, and if surgery has to be done, we'll be careful. Again, anesthesia. Some patients or some communities are allergic to anesthesia, the medicines they give. So they have to change the normal anesthetic medications what they give. So anesthetists will be previously informed about the patients who are coming in from these communities and also from the localities. Next slide, please. Okay. So the order. First, it should always be in an ascending order or in a descending order. I have seen, and I myself have done it. I'm not saying others. I myself have done it as a UG. That a patient came with complaints of fever for 5 days. He had throat pain for 1 month, and he had difficulty in swallowing for 15 days. So that is not the way that we take or present the history. It should be in a proper ascending or a descending format. So first thing is the onset. Since when the patient has the symptoms, the duration, how long he's been having it, is it progressing? That means, is it worsening or is continuously the same? Are there any aggravating or relieving factors? Matlab, aggravating, like what irritates it or what aggravates the condition? What makes the condition more worse? In case of tonsillitis, consuming cold foods, exposure to cold climate, eating chocolates and sweets can aggravate the condition. And what relieves it? Are they doing some home remedies? Are they taking any other medication? So this is also very important. Some people give you clear, history about taking Ayurvedic medicines or alternative medicines for their problem. But they will be coming to you saying that I have been on Ayurvedic treatment or Unani medicine treatment for the past 6 months and my allergy is okay with this, but I'm just want to try this also. So please tell the patient, if you want to start with allopathic medicines, you have to stop that and then start this. So this is again important when you ask them. And associated symptoms. Your associated symptoms and negative history is the most constant and the most important thing in arriving for a diagnosis for a patient with any disease. Every disease will have an associated symptom. Ear pain will not be only with ear pain. The patient might also have ear itching sensation. The patient might have a ear block sensation, a hard of hearing, and so on. Okay, so what does it give? What idea does it give? For example, let's take a CSOM patient. If the patient has complaints of hard of hearing and he gives only that history, you are going to think about a lot of things in your mind apart from CSOM. You will be having CSOM in your mind. Even a simple earwax can cause, otitis externa can cause, automycosis, that is fungal infection of the ear, can cause hard of hearing. So with just one history, it's difficult. So always ask for associated symptoms. Obviously, the patient will not come and tell you, I have this. So how are we going to ask? What we're going to take in the next few slides. See in the next few slides. Next slide, please.
Guys, so this is the first doubt segment. As far as now what we have covered, if anyone have any doubt, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the doubt to sir, so sir might clear it out. So we'll be having a 10-second fact break now.
No, we can take more than 10 seconds, not a problem, Yashwant.
Sure, sir.
Any doubts, guys? Anything you want to ask in the first bit of your history taking? See, this is not a class. This is a one-on-one conversation. You can just ask me anything. Why this is important? Why do you say so? Why do you think the address is important? Or what kind of aggravating factors patients can come with? All these questions you can ask me. If there are no questions, we can move on to the next slide. Yes, Sujan.
Sir, so while taking the history, do we have to mention the community of that person also? Because you mentioned that community plays an important role in surgery.
Not necessary. You yourself will find out. What if the patient say, I'm Mohammed Farooq, or if he's saying, my name is Mayappan, or if he's saying, I'm Francis. You're going to know what religion is he from, first of all. So then if he says, like, I'm from down south, I'm from Karaikudi, or, the places where Chettiar people are most, you can ask, are you a Chettiar? You don't have to mention. You can ask them. There's nothing wrong in asking them. You don't have to mention the community or the caste here. No.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, what is the reason behind that? Like, if we start taking allopathy, why are we not supposed to take Ayurveda medicines like that?
Simple thing, drug interactions. See, Ayurvedic medicines are okay. We don't mind mixing Ayurvedic with allopathy most of the times. But other medicines, other forms of medicines, such as Hunani or other things, most of those medicines will have a minimal amount of chemicals or metals in form of chemicals mixed with the tablets. Already those could be renal toxic or hepatotoxic. You adding another medicine, maybe an antibiotic or a steroid for that matter, it's going to be more toxic to the kidney or the liver. So you have to make sure the patient is not on any other alternative medicines before you start them on our own allopathic medicines.
Okay, sir, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, or we can move to the next slide? Yes, we'll move. Yes.
Sure, sir. So we are moving on, guys.
So coming to the history taking for the year. Okay, before going into the next slide, I would want to tell you what are the commonest complaints a patient can come to us or present to us in the OPD for ear complaints. So commonly we have itching, ear block, ear irritation. Some people say irritation for itching, hard of hearing or loss of hearing, hearing loss, pain over the ear, foreign body sensation, insect moving inside and outside sensation, sudden block which gets relieved and again going for a block. Then they have a wet feeling inside the ear, and they also feel something is moving inside the ear, but something watery kind of thing is moving inside the ear, but they don't feel anything outside. The outer ear is dry. So every history has a diagnosis. So let's go from first to worst. So first, ear itching, I said. Ear itching can happen in simple dry wax, can happen in elderly age. Elderly age group are the most important people and the very common people that you were going to see in case if you guys are going to take ENT, in your ENT practice. Out of 10 patients, 3 will be elderly in ENT. And they will come with a vague symptom that you will not find any sign inside, and you will be like, they are completely fine. And why they are sitting in front of me? That's most of the times we have a question. But then going on and seeing back the textbooks and going on and seeing the experience from other doctors that we have gained all these years, we have seen that these elderly people, as they degenerate, all the cells in their body degenerate. There are dry scales forming all over the skin. Similarly, dry scales form inside and around the external aortic canal skin. That will cause itchy sensation and sometimes pain. So what they do, if it's itching, they put something inside and probe it, clean it, cause bleeding, come to us again. So think about in elderly itching, think about scaly skin, just put them on anti-allergic. Next, ear pain can be caused in otitis externa. If they middle the ear with something, there is fungal infection. Very, very uncommon in CSOM BC ear pain unless and until it's an acute exacerbation of a chronic suppurative otitis media or acute suppurative otitis media itself. Okay, ear block can be seen in wax, CSOM, ASOM, acute otitis media with effusion, and also external otitis externa. So all these will cause ear block. Then itchy sensation is seen in automycosis and in CSOM active disease, where the discharge is always present in the external canal. Then a wet feeling in the ear is seen in ASOM and CSOM. A block sensation which is from inside and not much of outside, which is getting relieved on and off. You think about a eustachian tube dysfunction, the same kind of ear block which we would have all experienced when we descend down the flight, and it's going to be staying there in your ears for some time. So that gives you an idea that it's relieving, but it's coming back. When he's drinking some warm fluids, it's getting relieved, but after some time it's coming back. So we are dealing with something to do with the eustachian tube and some pressure changes inside the middle ear, which is causing this on and off block. All right. So going on to the associated symptoms, this is another important thing. When we are talking about ear, the only case that we will give you is a chronic otitis media mucosal type, otherwise known as a chronic suppurative otitis media tubotympanic type. So why is only this thing given? Okay, this is the easiest one. We don't give you aticoantral disease or a squamosal disease because the diagnosis is difficult. You might miss finding. So this is the only disease that is given from the ear for you. So any ear case given means your diagnosis is CSOM tubotympanic type or COM mucosal type. So you don't have to think about any other conditions, but associated symptoms such as or signs such as fungal debris, minimal wax, pus secretions, all these can be found and can be present inside your ear canal and inside the middle ear. All right. So a CSOM, what are the associated symptoms that we are going to see? Next slide. First of all, ear discharge. It's a commonest history. A patient will come to you with a case of CSOM. Number one, duration. You can easily say whether we are dealing with a chronic suppurative otitis media or an acute suppurative otitis media. I'm just having this first time ear discharge for 7 days. I never had this before. This is the first time. I had a recent episode of cold, and after that my ear started discharging. I had a pain, and pain started relieving after the discharge came on. So all these things goes in favor of acute suppurative otitis media. Whereas the patient say, I've been having this for the past 7 years. Every time I take a head bath, every time I get a cold, once in 3 months, I get the ear discharge, which gets relieved when I take medicines. So the duration tells you whether we are dealing with an acute disease or a chronic disease. Number two, laterality, unilateral or bilateral. A patient coming to you and telling you, I have a bilateral hard of hearing. Okay, there can be bilateral discharge also, which denotes a bilateral CSOM. But bilateral hard of hearing, if it's an elderly patient, think about presbyacusis, which is hard of hearing in elderly due to old age. And if they are young people, and if they're complaining of bilateral hard of hearing, think about otosclerosis and ask about otosclerosis in family. Otosclerosis is a condition which is a genetic condition which is predisposed by there is some, the ossicles inside the ear canal which has to be strong. It's not strong, it has become soft due to two changes in the bone. There is metaplasia occurs. Okay, there's some morphological changes which does not allow these ossicles to move to and fro. So which when occurs, the patient will have ear block. Commonly seen in family, and it is usually seen in the middle age after 25-30, commonly seen in females. So if you think of a bilateral disease without a ear discharge, and if a middle-aged female, ask for a history of otosclerosis in their family. Periodicity, whether it's constant or intermittent. So this one gives us a clear diagnosis. If the discharge is intermittent, we are dealing with a tubotympanic type or a mucosal type of disease. If it's constant, that is slowly, it's keep on filling every day. Even though you clean, it's there. Even though you take medicines, it's there. That means we are dealing with an aticoantral type of disease where the discharge is due to necrosis of bone and erosion of the adjacent structures. Is it seasonal? Seasonal matlab, we are dealing with something allergic or associated with URA. Whenever the child gets or the patient gets upper respiratory tract infection, the secretions from the nasal cavity goes through the eustachian tube, comes into the middle ear, and then out to the external canal. And the character of the discharge will tell you what we are dealing with. Is it whitish, yellow, green? Okay, whitish discharge we see mostly in cases of otomycosis, which is a fungal debris. Yellow and green in case of CSOM, where it's either by a staph or strep infection, or green in case of a pseudomonas infection. Quantity, again, a profuse, if you are going to mention I have a patient who is coming to me with a ear discharge which is scanty, then you should be very, very sure to talk or answer every question about atticoantral type of disease, because scanty discharge is seen only in atticoantral type of disease or squamosal type or unsafe type of disease. Okay, so normally CSOM will be profuse because it's the mucosa in the middle ear. It's going to be infected when there is an URI. The goblet cells are going to secrete all these secretions, which keeps on coming out. Okay. Then the consistency, a watery consistency or a clear watery discharge from the ear. You think about CSF autourea and go back and ask the patient, did you have any history of trauma or a head injury? That is very important, which tells us the patient has CSF autourea. Is it mucopurulent? Mucopurulent, commonly seen in CSOM, tubotympanic disease, and a purulent type is seen in a squamosal type or an infection by a Pseudomonas species. Bloodstained, we'll see we'll be able to see in case of otitis externa, not only malignant otitis externa, we can also see in external otitis. We see in furunculosis, which is a small follicle present over the hair follicle of the ear canal laterally. Squamosal type of disease will have bleeding, as the name suggests, unsafe, that's why it's bleeding. Myiasis, sometimes patients from a poor or a underdeveloped area, in a crowded area, a patient who's not taking care of his health as well as his self-cleanliness properly can develop myiasis if he's an immunocompromised patient. Myiasis matlab, it's nothing, it's just maggots in the ear. So if the ear is going to be dirty, the fly is going to go and put some eggs there. So you're going to see a lot of maggots coming out of the ear. We have cases. Maybe next time, if time permits, and if we are all lucky when we meet, not virtually and directly, we have some cases which we have stored or in our laptops. When you come to the department, it's there in the department. I'll show you some cases of myiasis of the ear. Then tumors. Any tumor will bleed, especially malignancy of the external auditory canal or the temporal bone will bleed. So you have to think about tumors. And the last one for a bleeding or a bloodstained discharges, when the patient has ear discharge, he tries to clean with the earbud, he hits himself, or he pokes the ear with the earbud or anything. I'm not joking. Some people come to us with history of probing ears with the crow's, what do you call that as? Crow's feather or any other bird's feather. They use keychain. They use all sorts of stupid shit and they put it inside the ears. I mean, we also have done it at one point of time. So please don't do it again. Next slide, please. Okay. Hearing loss or a hard of hearing. If the duration, the patient comes to you after one day and suddenly I'm having hearing loss. It could be either because of a trauma or there is a condition called as idiopathic sudden sensorineural hearing loss, which is due to some viral infection. Recently, we are seeing some patients with COVID infection suddenly losing their hearing. Okay, so like COVID affects everything from head to toe. It is also affecting your eighth nerve. So patients are having sudden SNHL. Chronic, if it's chronic for a longer time, think about a chronic otitis media, otosclerosis, or ossicular discontinuity due to a trauma or probing the ears or falling down from a height. All those things will cause ossicular chain discontinuity, which the patient will come to you with hard of hearing for a longer time. Severity, is it affecting your work? Like, are you able to talk over the phone? Are you able to hear the other patient or other person who's talking on the other side clearly? They will tell you, sir, on the right side I'm able to hear clearly, but on the left side where I'm having my discharge, I'm not able to clearly hear the person clearly, or there is a muffled voice. Sometimes patients will not accept that they have loss of hearing or hard of hearing. The fear of simple thing that you will ask them to go and wear a hearing aid. So for that reason, they'll say, no, my hearing is better. But we can, we have ways to find out whether they are malingering or lying or not. All right. So how about the whisper? Are they able to hear whispers? Are they able to hear normal conversations, or only when they are when they shout? So there is a condition called as there's a condition where the patients will be able to hear better in a loud environment and not in a silent environment. Can anybody tell me what is this?
Otosclerosis, sir.
Yes. What is it called as? What is it called as? The condition called as?
Tullius phenomenon.
Thulius phenomenon is not seen in this. It's seen in
Paracelsus
dehiscence.
Paracelsus villi.
Exactly. Paracelsus Wilsi. Okay. Paracelsus Wilsi is a condition where the patient will be able to hear in a louder environment. Simple factor is that their sound is already impeded, but in a loud environment, more sound will be going into the ear. As Tepi's function will be more impeded, whereas the person next to them, when they are talking, that sound alone they'll be able to hear clearly, whereas a normal person won't be able to hear that. So that occurs only in patients with autosclerosis. It's called as Paracelsus Wilsi. So again, they will clearly say, sir, வீட்டில் இருக்கும்போது I'm not able to hear anything when I'm talking to my friends, when I'm talking to my family members. But when I go out, when I'm in a crowd or when I'm in a meeting, when I'm in a function, I'm able to hear things very clearly. So that means you are dealing with a patient who has autosclerosis. Okay? Then again, laterality, whether it's unilateral, bilateral, which side is worse, which side is better, is it varying? Which suddenly, like, in the morning I'm able to hear better, and as the day goes by, my ear is getting blocked. So in this case, that means we are dealing with eustachian tube dysfunction, because as and when the day goes by, we're all working, we're talking a lot, we use the phone a lot, pressure changes happens on and off, that can cause eustachian tube dysfunction, so that the ears can get blocked in the evenings. Okay. And periodicity is whether it's associated with any upper respiratory tract infection or not. How regular is the discharge and all those things, and hearing loss. Okay. Next. Can anybody define what is tinnitus? Just an open thing. See, it can be wrong. Anyway, I'll tell you what is tinnitus. But if anybody can define what is tinnitus? Can I tell? It's an abnormal perception of sound in the absence of an external stimuli. This is a very, very famous question. Every ENT examiner will like to ask. If you say no history of tinnitus, they'll say what is tinnitus. If you say history of tinnitus, they'll ask you what is tinnitus. So anyway, know this. It's an abnormal perception of sound in the absence of an external stimuli. Okay, so without giving a sound without somebody else talking, without a phone ringing, without you listening to music, you will be hearing something inside. So commonly tinnitus is a ringing type of tinnitus, or in some patients it's like a air blowing, whoosh kind of sound. But if the patient says, I'm able to hear people talking inside my ears, please send them to psychiatric department. They don't belong to ENT. Okay, right. And tinnitus, you first ask about the duration, how long it's been there, whether it's a low pitch tinnitus or a high pitch tinnitus. Okay, a low pitch tinnitus we see in most of the sensorineural hearing loss in old age patients, which starts slowly, and then as the day goes by and the years goes by, it keeps on increasing. And a high pitch tinnitus is, you see, in a what condition we see high pitch tinnitus, or roaring tinnitus we call that as? Which condition? It's a triad of roaring tinnitus, low frequency sensorineural hearing loss, giddiness, oral fullness. We're dealing with a case of Meniere's here. Okay, so a Meniere's disease will have a high-pitched tinnitus, whereas a low-pitched tinnitus will be seen even in otitis media with effusion, or eustachian tube dysfunction, or acute otitis media. In a very, very small perforation, we can hear a low-pitched tinnitus. Laterality. So if it's on one side, you'll know what we are dealing with. A discharge from one side with tinnitus, and hard of hearing, you think about CSOM and nothing else. Bilateral tinnitus, you think about a central pathology. Why? Why do you think about a central pathology here? Anyone? Any guesses here? Anybody can guess, no problem at all, ma. Just be open. We're not asking you to find out whether you guys have studied or not. It's just that, I'm trying to push you into think a little bit more than ENT. So that's the problem with an ENT surgeons, right? Like we poke our ears and nose and mouth into all the departments, like dentists, ophthalmologists, and the neurosurgeons. So any pathology in the middle cranial fossa can cause a bilateral tinnitus. The reason is being simple. The petrous apex of the temporal bone opens into the middle cranial fossa into the cerebellopontine angle. So if you have a CP angle tumor, such as a vestibular schwannoma or a glioma in that region, or even a meningioma, can present with a bilateral tinnitus. Simple as that. So a unilateral tinnitus, you think about a local pathology. A bilateral tinnitus, you think about a central pathology. Severity of the tinnitus. Some people go mad because of tinnitus. I even have patients who have suicidal tendencies because they're not able to sleep. And the sound is keep on ringing inside the ear, and they want to go and hit themselves somewhere. So the severity of the tinnitus is very important in treating the patients. And when you have a patient who is coming to you only with tinnitus, you should not only be an ENT surgeon, but you should also be their psychotherapist and counsel them, tell them, assure them that it's nothing else but just a nerve is getting irritated and it's becoming tired. So it produces these kind of weird noises, and it's nothing else. You don't have to worry about anything. Just keep continuing your work and do not concentrate on this. So we will take care of you. So that's more important as an ENT surgeon when you have a patient with tinnitus. Periodicity, whether it's a continuous tinnitus or intermittent tinnitus. A continuous tinnitus is seen in few conditions of vascular tumors, such as glomus jugular or a glomus tympanicum, where the tumor itself is a vascular malformation which is happening inside your middle ear or your mastoid region. When the pulse, for every pulse, you will be hearing a pulsatile tinnitus, doop, 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 doop kind of sound. So when the patient says, for every pulse rate, I am able to hear the sound the same way, it's not continuous, it's kind of intermittent, or it's kind of, pulsing. So that in those cases, you think about a AV malformation in the middle ear, or you also think about a bloody mass, something like glomus inside the middle ear. Okay, the next thing is very, very important. Whether is associated with giddiness, headache, and hearing loss. So this is where we come to the complications of the disease. When a tinnitus is with giddiness, we have multiple diagnoses, starting from your Meniere's, a CSOM with labyrinthitis, a CSOM with labyrinthitis and with the sensorineural hearing loss. Then we can have CSF autoria can present with tinnitus and giddiness. Patients with neurological symptoms who has CSOM can present with tinnitus and giddiness. So you will have multiple things in your mind, and then every question after the first initial symptom what the patient presents you ask, it's going to take you directly to your diagnosis. Headache will tell you whether we are dealing with a central pathology or a peripheral pathology. Hearing loss, most of the patients with tinnitus, trust me, they will have hearing loss, because most of the tinnitus is mainly because due to the nerve irritation or because of a peripheral pathology like a CSOM or ASOM, AOM causing tinnitus. If there is no hearing loss and there is only tinnitus, it means there are only two ways. One, the patient is malingering. He is either lying to you, or he has to be psychologically evaluated for further treatment. All right. So can we go to the next slide? Yes. Otalgia. Otalgia means ear pain. Before talking about the ear pain, I would like to tell you something. When a patient comes to you with just ear pain and nothing else, before seeing the ear, please examine the other areas. There is a condition called as referred otalgia, where the patient will have pain in the ear, but the pain will be radiated from somewhere else. Okay, so for example, a patient who has sinusitis can have a referred ear pain because of eustachian tube involvement. A patient with adenoiditis, adenoid involving or blocking the eustachian tube can present with only ear pain. A patient with pharyngitis or tonsillitis or ulcers in the tongue or malignant growth in the tongue or the oropharynx can present with unilateral or bilateral ear pain. That's because the nerve which supplies the pharynx also supplies the ear. That is a part of the glossopharyngeal nerve. So we call this glossopharyngeal neuralgia, which is otherwise known as referred otalgia. Apart from these areas, the other areas where we can have ear pain is, in case of a migraine, they will have a unilateral headache with a ear pain. So you think about migraine before going and seeing inside the ear. Temporomandibular joint arthritis or arthralgia, when you have a joint dislocation, you might have severe pain inside the ear. Whereas when you see the ear, yours will be absolutely fine. And they'll clearly tell you, when I open the mouth and close while yawning or while I'm chewing, I'm having severe ear pain. So that should tell you that we are dealing with temporomandibular joint arthralgia. All right. So having that in mind, a referred arthralgia in mind, you have to go inside and check these things. So number one, how long it's been there, how constant it is. If it's a very constant ear pain, it could be because of a spasm of tensor tympani muscle, which is seen in CSOM, where the middle ear is completely infected and inflamed. And it could be intermittent in case of eustachian tube dysfunction. Whether it's aggravating on chewing movements or touching the pinna. If it's on chewing movements, you should think about otitis externa, temporomandibular joint arthralgia. And when you touch the pinna or the tragus, they'll have severe pain. Again, I keep touching the ear and I have severe pain. That means we are dealing with the case of otitis externa. How's the character? Is it a dull aching pain? Is it a stabbing pain, pricking type of pain, or a cutting type of pain? The patients will clearly tell. So dull aching pain will be seen mostly in a middle ear pathology. A stabbing kind of pain will be seen in furunculosis or folliculitis, which is a follicular infection of the external auditory canal. A cutting type of pain they'll be able to experience after a trauma or after they use something to clean the ear canal and then they injure the ear canal. And a pin pricking type of pain is commonly seen in automycosis and in cases of acute otitis media. So these are the different types of character of pain, which also gives you idea as to what kind of disease we are dealing with. Then the laterality, it's bilateral, unilateral, and depends upon the side where the wax is there or the discharge is there, they will have a otolgia. Wax can also cause ear pain. If wax not treated at the right time, can go in for changes such as keratosis obturans, or there's a condition called as ceruminoma, which is a tumor which is caused by long-standing wax. Okay, these things can erode the ear canal, expand inside the ear canal, and cause severe pain. Okay. But again, post-tonsillectomy, it's because of both the tonsils you remove, glossopharyngeal neuralgia is present there. Next. So giddiness is, we are going into the neurologists and the general physicians way here. So a peripheral giddiness can be easily distinguished from a central giddiness. Most of the peripheral giddiness, that is the giddiness associated with ear complaints, will be mostly when they change the posture, when they sit up from sitting position, when they lie down, when they get up from the lying down position, they have a giddiness. It's mostly due to ear pathology. When they get up and then they feel giddy, they fall down, it's because of hypotension. Okay, so see, we are going to deal with hypotension. You have to rule out hypotension here, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, and then you have to talk about what kind of, whether you are, we have to ask what is first, whether you feel the giddiness or it's unsteadiness. Unsteadiness is mostly not seen in peripheral pathology. We see a giddiness which is rotatory type. The patient will be able to say, I'm able to feel the environment around me rotating more than themselves rotating inside the environment. So that gives you an idea that we are dealing with a peripheral pathology. How and when it started? So what happened? I started having ear discharge, then slowly ear pain. Now, whenever I get more discharge, I have a ear pain. Or when I listen to, loud sounds, I have ear pain. So someone was telling about Tullio's phenomenon. So now coming back to Tullio's phenomenon, what is Tullio's phenomenon?
Vertigo on hearing loud sound.
Exactly. So that is seen in superior semicircular canal dehiscence. Again, that is a labyrinth, part of labyrinth. So when the infection has gone deep inside, eroded the lateral semicircular canal and the superior canal, the Tullio's phenomenon will occur. Hearing loud sounds, the patient will have severe giddiness. Okay, so how and when it started? Is it only after ear discharge, only after ear pain, hard of hearing? So obviously we are dealing with CSOM. No, it is always present. Whenever it's present while walking, while cooking, while eating, talking, That means we are dealing with a central pathology. How long it lasted? Is it associated with loss of consciousness? We don't deal with loss of consciousness, period. ENT has nothing to do with loss of consciousness. If the patient says he has loss of consciousness, then directly send him to a neurologist, do a CT scan of the brain, and you might find something interesting inside. Who knows? The severity of the giddiness, how severe it is. Are they able to continue doing their work, or it's completely bad that they're not even able to get up and turn or even talk to people? It's so bad that they have to take risks completely. Severe cases we see in case of a severe labyrinthine fistula, or if there's a cholesteatoma which has gone and eroded the semicircular canals, or in malignancies we see a severity. Frequency, how frequently we have the giddiness. Is it daily? Is it weekly once? Is it only during strenuous exercise? Is it during episodes of strain or stress? And your associated symptoms like tinnitus, hard of hearing, heaviness in the ear, and vomiting. See, tinnitus, hearing loss, heaviness in the ear, all goes in favor of Meniere's disease. The patient say, I have giddiness followed by, during episodes of giddiness, my ears are blocked, I'm not able to hear clearly, and I also have a ringing sensation in the sound which comes and goes, and vomiting on and off. You are dealing with a patient who is a case of Meniere's disease, and vomiting also denotes we also maybe are dealing with a patient who has a central pathology. All right. So giddiness is an important history, and when the patient tells he has giddiness, that means the labyrinth is affected. In the case of CSOM, tinnitus means the inner ear is also affected along with labyrinth. Giddiness means the labyrinth is completely affected, which is causing this problem. Another type of giddiness, which is a mild giddiness, which is seen when they blow the nostrils, or when they go up and down, when they climb down the stairs. All those things is due to because of eustachian tube dysfunction. When the pressure changes away from the atmospheric pressure, you have a mild giddiness. In that case, we are dealing with eustachian tube dysfunction. Next. Itchy ears, like I told you, you should think about a dry wax, automycosis, dermatological conditions. This is another one. When you see the ear, the pinna should be having the normal skin color as the external canal, as well as the skin over the face and everything. If the skin is depigmented or it's hyperpigmented, think about a seborrheic dermatitis in that area. Could be a fungal infection of the pinna which could cause depigmentation. That also causes severe itching of the ear canal. A eustachian tube catarrh, that is eustachian tube dysfunction, which is a precursor for your acute otitis media, can also cause itchy sensation inside the ear with ear block. A foreign body sensation in the ear could be a foreign body itself, secretory otitis media, a lock, ear lock in sense sudden block in the ear which gets relieved. So that also gives, that's what I was telling you. So they feel like something moving inside and outside. So all these goes in favor of eustachian tube dysfunction. Early phase of acute otitis media, again, eustachian tube catarrh, autophony, and hyperacusis. Hyperacusis or paracusis wilsi seen in otosclerosis. And autophony is nothing but we hear our sounds more louder than other people. So we kind of talk very low or in a very slow manner, whereas the other patient will be like, why are you whispering? Why can't you talk loudly? He was like, no, I'm talking louder enough. I'm not able to hear my own sound. It's like irritating for me. It happens when your eustachian tube is wide opened in case of a patulous eustachian tube. Okay, next. Questions here.
Alright guys, so now we have the second doubt segment. So if anyone have any doubt so far what have we covered, so you can feel free to ask sir, so he might clear it out.
Any questions?
Hello.
Yeah, ma.
Yes, sir. So I had a question about vertigo, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we talk about the different causes of vertigo,
Mm-hmm.
so like in BPPV, there's usually positional, and in Meniere's, it's usually episodic.
Yes.
And like when you have both combined, I think it's they said something about the vertebral arteries getting compressed.
Vertebral and basilar artery that gets compressed.
Yes.
See, BPPV patients, their position varies and they have giddiness. Okay, but a similar complaint we also see in patients with cervical spondylosis, where the vertebral artery and the basilar artery can get compressed on movement of head. Am I right? So when they try
Yes,
to
sir.
change the head movement side to side, or they see back and forth, obviously the artery is going to get compressed and they will have giddiness. So how do we differentiate this is what the next diagnostic test. So like, it's beautiful that you brought this out. So when a patient has a positional vertigo, the first thing you think about is BPPV. The next thing you think about is your cervical spondylosis. The patient is an elderly patient, more than 45 plus. Okay. So how do we differentiate these both? Is cervical spondylosis, there's a simple test. Ask the patient to sit straight, keep the hands down. It's this way. Can you all see my video here? 1 second. Yes, am I visible? Okay. So the patient will ask to slowly raise the hands like this and ask them to slowly bring it and keep it on their head like this. Patients with cervical spondylosis and pain on that side won't be able to lift their hand above their shoulder levels. Okay, that is one thing. And patients with BPPV, as you already know, it's you will do a Dick-Salpeix maneuver or a Dick-Salpeix test to find out we are having a case of BPPV or it's something else. Okay. For different semicircular canals, we have different maneuvers. This comes in examination especially. For lateral canal, we do or a posterior canal, we do a Dick-Salpeix test. For a lateral or a superior canal, we do a ball roll maneuver or a sausage roll maneuver test, barbecue roll maneuver test. It's like we make the patient roll around and then come back rolling around, and then we see for nystagmus. So there are different types of tests for every disease or symptoms, so that we can slowly delineate and differentiate from each from one another. And like you said, in Menius, they might not have an episode. I mean, they have an episodic vertigo, but they don't. It's not usually positional. Sometimes the position and the episodes come together. It's just to confuse. So you have to go and ask the history again to make sure you are right in your diagnosis. Associated symptoms and will clearly tell you that we are dealing with BPPV or something else.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? In the year history, which Haydn, yes, Amritavarshini.
Sir, I had a question about how an acoustic neuroma can cause diplopia.
Beautiful. Okay. So coming back to the anatomy. So you guys remember a little bit about you studying about cerebellopontine angle?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Cerebellopontine angle. Think about it as a five-sided room or a person head. Okay. So the hair part, the neck, both the ears, anterior part. So that's how we divide. Like on the top, it's superiorly we have the fifth and sixth nerve running along. Fifth nerve is more close proximity to the cerebellopontine angle than the sixth nerve. When we have an acoustic neuroma, which is big in size, more than 3 centimeter, it compresses over the fifth nerve and eventually over the sixth nerve, which will cause diplopia. But diplopia will be followed by a severe unilateral headache because of the trigeminal nerve. It's because of where it is arising from, right? It's a cerebellopontine angle tumor, vestibular schwannoma or acoustic neuroma. We don't call it as acoustic neuroma anymore. It's called as vestibular schwannoma.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Or can we go move on to the history taking in nose? Yashwant? Yes. So the commonest complaints a patient can come to you when in nose case is commonest is nasal block, nasal discharge, bleeding from the nose, smell, and distortion, that is appearance of the nose. These are the most commonest complaints. We'll see what are those each by each. Next slide, please. Okay, nasal block or obstruction. Duration is going to tell you whether we're dealing with an acute case or a chronic case. Laterality. Okay, a unilateral nasal block, there is the question for you in 5 marks as well as we can ask you in your clinicals is what are the differentials for a unilateral nasal block. You can start from saying a deviated nasal septum, inferior tubular hypertrophy, foreign body in the nasal cavity, any nasal mass, which could be benign or malignant, tumors of the nasal cavity. What else? Yeah, these are the commonest. Okay, these are the commonest which can cause an antroconal polyp, which can cause a unilateral nasal mass. Whereas if the patient comes to you with a bilateral nasal mass, nasal block, you think about allergic rhinitis, sinusitis, septal hematoma, most probably after an injury or a surgery, or ethmoidal polyps, which is always bilateral. Okay, coming to the polyp again, we have antroconal polyp and ethmoidal polyps. Why is antroconal polyp? Guys, give me 1 second. I'm getting an emergency call. Just give me 1 second. So sorry.
No worries, sir. Guys, sir will be back in a minute, so kindly stay online.
So sorry, I'm back. Yes. So antroconal polyp, we have only one maxillary sinus on one side, whereas the ethmoidal sinuses, we say and maxillary sinus and ethmoidal sinuses. That's because ethmoidal sinus is a group of air cells either side, making up to 12 to 20 cells each side, whereas maxillary sinus is only one per side. So if a polyp is arising from maxillary sinus, it's going to be only one polyp, whereas if it's arising from the ethmoidal sinuses, it's going to be multiple polyps. And the ethmoidal sinus is always due to allergic reactions, whereas antroconal is because of an infection. So infection can occur only in one side, whereas allergy is always bilateral. That is why ethmoidal polyps are always bilateral, antroconal polyp is always unilateral. Okay, know this difference. And the commonest cases that we can keep for you, number one is a deviated septum. For sure, it will be there for 70% of you. The remaining 30% of you who are like not very lucky, you might have polyps, or in case if a patient comes to the OPD that day with atrophic rhinitis, we can have it. If a patient with rhinosporidiosis or inverted papilloma or any other nasal mass, he comes on that day, we can use that case for you. Okay, so nose, the short case, it's not a long case, but you should know that apart from a deviated septum, you should also know about these other diseases. Okay, so going on to the next is a character. Is it inspiration, expressional? When there is nasal block. So when the patient has a block during inspiration, what do you mean? When do they have a inspirational nasal block? Is in all the conditions that you see above, deviated septum, foreign body, and all those things. Whereas if the patient has a nasal block during expiration, it is due to an antroconal polyp. It's just a simple mechanism where the ball valve mechanism, where when you inspire air, the polyp goes inside the sinus. When you expire, it is expelled out of the sinus and it completely blocks your nasal cavity. So you will have a nasal twang, you will have a whistling sound when you breathe out. Then, what are the aggravating factors? Is it allergic seasonal variation? Is it early in the morning if they have a nasal obstruction? That's because again allergic will cause early morning nasal obstruction. Sneezing, emotional stress can cause nasal obstruction. In case of vasomotor rhinitis. Vasomotor rhinitis is another condition similar to allergic rhinitis, which has all the similar factors and features of allergic rhinitis, except the fact that both can't be treated with the same medicine, right? Then is a food causing nasal block? Drugs which we are patients on for a longer time is causing nasal block, you have to say. There is a condition called as a rhinitis medicamentosa. That means usage of phenylephrine or oxymetazoline and xylometazoline drops for a longer period will cause an irreversible mucosal changes in your nasal cavity, which causes your nasal mucosa to become hypertrophied and cause severe secretions, which will never stop, and patients will go in for complete nasal block. That is why we tell the patients do not use nasal drops without the prescription of a ENT doctor. We don't give the drops for more than 3 to 5 days. Whereas some people, some doctors, they still practice use Nasovion or Otrivin for about a month's time. So no, you should use it on emergency basis when you have a severe nasal block. So that you should think about rhinitis medicamentosa. And relieving factors. What are the relieving factors? Is the nasal block relieved by a nasal drop, or you have to use a spray, or you have to do steam inhaling, or you have to eat something which relieves your nasal block? Whatever it is, gives you a clear idea as to what kind of disease we are dealing with. Next. Discharge again. Duration of the discharge, whether it's unilateral or bilateral. Unilateral discharge is seen as it's shown here in the foreign body or a rhinolith. Rhinolith is nothing but a forgotten foreign body which is deposited by calcium and calcium crystals in the nasal cavity, which can cause continuous discharge, or a polyp which is present unilaterally, or a malignancy can present unilateral nasal discharge. If a child presents to you with a unilateral nasal discharge since birth, think about corneal atresia. Because corneal atresia unilateral is a rare entity which can be easily missed out by anybody unless and until the child comes to an age of 5 or 6 years old, because they'll be having continuous unilateral nasal discharge. Bilateral is due to sinusitis or rhinitis. Severity, whether it's scanty, moderate, or copious. Scanty discharge you will see in where there's a polyp or where there's a mass lesion which is obstructing the sinus wall. So when on and off, when the patient moves and gets up and moves his head, you might get discharge. Otherwise, it's going to be a copious discharge in case of allergic rhinitis and sinusitis. Periodicity, whether it's constant, whether it's perennial, allergic in case of seasonal. What is the character of the discharge? CSF rhinorrhea and viral rhinitis and allergic rhinitis, it will be mostly watery to mucoid. Mucopurulent discharge seen in sinusitis or any infection and in malignancies. Purulent discharge is seen in atrophic rhinitis and chronic sinusitis. In atrophic rhinitis, we have a characteristic discharge which has a very foul smell, where the patient will not be able to perceive the smell at all. It's because of the action of a bacteria called as Klebsiella ozonae, which causes drying of the nasal cavity and very, very bad odor from the nasal cavity. Patients won't be able to perceive it, and they are termed as merciful anosmia breathers. They won't be able to smell their own bad smell coming from within inside. Blood stain is seen in infected nasal mass, malignancies after surgery, or nasal myiasis. And you have to talk about the aggravating factors and relieving factors as to what aggravates the discharges. Cold food, cold exposure, exposure to dust, or what relieves it by medicine or steam inhalation. You have to ask them. So all these things will tell you. See, for example, a patient is coming to you with a unilateral nasal block with foul smelling discharge for about 7 days, who's a 7-year-old kid. What will you think about first? Anyone? A 7-year-old kid comes to you with a unilateral discharge which is foul smelling or which is purulent, and the patient also has mild bleeding on and off. What could it be possibly?
Foreign body.
Exactly, it's a foreign body. The same way, a 17-year-old boy comes to you with bleeding which is unprovoked, and he has a nasal block on that side. What is your first diagnosis in mind? Very good. Juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. See, the question is very clear. At 17 years, so juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma is another condition, benign condition of the nose, which occurs in adolescent males. So if I'm going to give you a history like a 15-year-old boy coming to you with unilateral nasal discharge and epistaxis which is unprovoked, which stops by itself, and the patient has a frog face deformity, don't even think about anything else. Just directly say juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. That's it. You are on spot. So that's how we come to see. It's good, like how we are coming to the history part of it. But the history itself, you will know. You see a elderly patient walking to you in your clinic. He's holding a kerchief which is fully blood-stained, and he's looking very lethargic and tired with or without a facial swelling. You think about a good. Number 2, normally we have two conditions in this. One is hypertensive epistaxis, very good. Number 2, and provoking and asking some history he tells you he's lost a part of weight. Loss of weight is there. He has kind of loss of appetite. So we are dealing with malignancy. Good. So hypertensive epistaxis and malignancy to be in your first diagnosis when a patient who is elderly comes to you with bleeding nasal block and all those things. So always it's important just to be giving you a little bit info about the present scenario. In the last 2 weeks alone in our department, we have treated nearly 25 to 25 cases of mucormycosis. The patient comes to us with a facial swelling, history of immunocompromised state, bleeding from the nasal cavity, foul smelling discharge. It's a fungal sinusitis. So this also, they can ask you, since you guys are in this COVID era and you guys are going to go for exam, all the ENT surgeons would have seen at least one case of mucormycosis, which they have never seen in their life before. So this will also might come as an exam question because it's communicable disease right now. So think about it and read about it. Next slide, please. Epistaxis. What do you mean by epistaxis? It's nothing but bleeding from the nasal cavity. How much of blood loss? Is it droplets? Is it too much? Is it unilateral? Is it bilateral? Is it frank blood? Or it's mixed with phlegm or sputum? Is the patient bleeding only from the nose or he's also coughing out blood? History of any trauma, injury to the nose by local fight or during an accident, falling from the bed, precipitating factors, trauma like there's something called as epistaxis digitorum where you pick the nose and you bleed because of the presence of the Little's area in the anterior part of septum. So most of us would have experienced it, the itching sensation in the anterior nasal cavity where we try to rub our nose or scratch our nose. Some people would have obviously had epistaxis also. It's all because you are scratching the Little's area directly. The blood vessels are more prominent there. Okay. And local causes, you should think about trauma, acute rhinitis, acute sinusitis, angiofibroma as we saw now, hemangioma, rhinosporidiosis, inverted papilloma, malignancy, and fungal sinusitis. Also, you should think about systemic causes like bleeding disorders, liver failure, severe hypertension, leukemia, uremia in vitamin K deficiency, and few pregnant ladies, because of hormonal changes, we see some bleeding from the nasal cavity. Okay, next. Sneezing. You should ask whether the patient has sneezing because associated allergic symptoms and the presence of a mass. Sometimes the patient will come to you with a mass protruding out of the nasal cavity. That will be the only presentation. I'm having something protruding out of my nose. Please take a look into it and let me know, cure me out of it. So think about different nasal masses, unilateral nasal masses, bilateral nasal masses. So if you see unilateral, think about an antrophonal polyp or a glioma, meningocele, meningoencephalocele, antrophonal polyp, I told you, or any other tumors which has grown deep inside and has come out into the nasal cavity, like juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma and stuff like that. If it's bilateral, it's ethmoidal polyps, fungal sinusitis, and malignancy, which is grown on one side, gone to the opposite side, eroding the septum and coming out to the opposite side. Associated with nasal obstruction, headache, fever, epistaxis, hyposmia. Nasal obstruction, obviously presence of a mass. Headache because it's going to occlude all the sinuses ostium and the patient is going to have sinusitis headache. Fever because obviously septicemia. Epistaxis if the mass is a bleeding mass. Hyposmia, obviously when the mass is going to grow big and it's going to block your cribriform plate over the roof of the nose. All the olfactory nerve endings are going to be blocked by the mass. The patient will have decreased nerve smell sensation. And what are the causes we see? Normally is atrophic rhinitis, rhinitis sicca, and nasoscleroma. Rhinitis sicca is nothing but dried crust from the nasal cavity due to drying of the nasal mucosa, which when picked can cause bleeding, and it can also present as a, it can grow in size and causes a nasal mass inside. Next, please. Anosmia, hyposmia, parosmia, cacosmia, and phantosmia. These are the different terminologies. Anosmia is complete loss of smell. Hyposmia is reduced sensation of smell. Parosmia is altered sense of smell, where in allergic rhinitis, the smell sensation is completely altered because of the hypertrophy of the mucosa. Cacosmia is whatever smell you smell, it's going to be experienced as a foul smell. And there's something called as a phantosmia, where if you go and smell a flower, it will be smelling like a like a chili powder. And if you go and smell a pepper powder, it will be smelling so beautifully, like a flower again. So that is phantosmia. Or in the absence of any smell sensation, if you are able to perceive smell, that is phantosmia. Again, that is psychological. All right, next. Headache. This is very important. You have to rule out a sinusitis headache from a allergic rhinitis headache from a migraine. So what kind of pain we have? Is it a compressing type of pain which is seen in sinusitis? A migrainous type of pain is unilateral always, and it will be radiating to the back of the head. Is a cluster headache will be present over the forehead. A frontal sinus headache will be present above the eyes. Facial pain headache will be seen in maxillary sinusitis. And there is something called as Flutter's neuralgia, where there's a sharp spur impinging on the lateral wall of the nose, can cause unilateral headache. That will mimic a migraine. So that we can find out only with a CT scan, X-ray, or we can do a diagnostic nasal endoscopy to rule out a Flutter's neuralgia, which is caused by a gross deviated septum or a sharp spur impinging on the lateral wall, compressing on the nerve. All right. So headache or other things, where it is radiating, how it is progressing, whether there are any other associated symptoms like double vision, vomiting, like projectile vomiting with headache, directly send them to a neurologist. It's not your case. Is it aggravated by a head bath in case of allergic rhinitis, acute sinusitis, or chronic sinusitis? In cases of polyposis, we'll have a headache can aggravate the head bath can aggravate the headache. Relieving factors will be because of medicines or steam inhalation. Eye symptoms, watering from the eyes, itchy eyes, diplopia, and proptosis. You can see in many of these conditions what I've told right now. Even in fungal sinusitis, malignancies, intracranial tumors like olfactory neuroblastoma, which can cause these kind of symptoms. And what are the causes? Causes of headache could be because after a surgery, we pack the nose, the patient will have headache. So don't think that as a sign or a symptom. Polyps blocking nasolacrimal duct can cause headache, eye pain, and continuous lacrimation. And also think about orbital complications. Orbital complications is a short note essay for you of sinusitis. There, the infection from the ethmoid of the maxillary can directly go or through the blood vessels go into the orbit, causing 5 stages, which is there in your textbook. Please go and read. It's called as Chandler's classification. This is an important thing which can cause headache with proptosis and infection in and around the eyes. Next. Any questions from the nose?
Guys, so now we have come to the third doubt segment. So any doubts as till now, if anyone has, so please feel free to ask.
Yes.
I believe Parul have raised her hand, so.
Yes, Parul.
So I had a question with regarding to snorting. So like if you have a patient who's doing some substance and he's snorting it, what can you find it by things in the nose? Or?
Easily. See, number one, in this part of the country, those people will not come to any doctors. They might have some friends who can give them some advices, but we can easily find out people who uses snuff or who uses cocaine to snort. Number one, the mucosa will be completely changed from a pink to a depigmented stage. Maybe it could be blackish or violetish stage. Number two, there will be dryness in the nasal cavity. There can be septal perforations, especially in case of cocaine snorters. There will be septal perforations. Patients with septal perforation will have a whistling sound when they breathe in and out. Okay, and they might have recurrent bleeding. As soon as you see the nasal cavity, you can say, "Do you snort?" You can ask them, "Do you snort anything?" So it's easily found. You can easily find it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Babu. Do you have any friend of yours Just
No, sir.
lighter side. No worry. Any other questions? We'll move to the throat.
All right, guys. If there are any other doubts, we'll move on.
Okay, so we have finished ear, nose, and throat. Ear, nose, and throat are three interrelated structures. That is why this is a single department, and eye is separated from us and gone away. So anything happens in the ear can cause a problem in the throat, and vice versa. And that also goes the same with nose. Most of the throat symptoms will also be preceded or precipitated by a nose symptom. So let's go and see what's there. Throat pain and sore throat is the commonest a patient comes to you with. Okay, the commonest complaints, the commonest diagnosis that we have for you is the tonsillitis. If it's a child, it's adenotonsillitis. We do not give you any other case, so don't worry about anything else except tonsils. But if you don't know anything in tonsil, you should know everything in tonsil, from what is a tonsil, what are the types of tonsil, what are the causative organisms that can cause tonsillitis, what is acute, what is chronic, what are the symptoms and signs of tonsil, how do you diagnose a tonsillitis patient, what are the investigations you need to do before you take up a patient for surgery, why they are needed, and finally, how do you do a tonsillectomy, how do you do an adenoidectomy, what are the complications of the tonsillectomy, and how do you manage them. These 12 questions are very important. Nobody can escape this, because tonsils is a very, very small topic, but it's very easy to understand. If you guys do not understand, you can always feel free to contact me in your free time, and I will be able to reply to you in my free time. So going to your throat pain and sore throat, whether it's sudden, in case of acute, it's insidious. Insidious is, you don't know when it started. Slowly it started, but right now you've been having it on and off for a past long time. It's chronic. Number of episodes per month or year. So at chronic tonsillitis, previously we say more than 4 or 5 episodes a year, we termed as chronic tonsillitis. But the recent nomenclature is not like that. 1 episode in 1 year, 2 episodes in 2 years, 3 episodes in 3 years is chronic tonsillitis. Okay, or if you have more than 7 episodes in a period of 7 years, in a period of 3 years, then you term the patient as chronic tonsillitis. Going to the nature, is it a pricking type of pain? That's the only type of pain they have. There'll be a pricking type or a cutting type of pain they will have in case of an ulcer present over the tonsil. Radiation is only to the ear, mostly, sometimes to the neck because of the presence of a node. Aggravating factors, mostly due to cold food or an upper respiratory tract infection. Relieving factors, they do saline gargle, warm water gargling, or they have to take some medications. Whether the pain or sore throat episodes are associated with episodes of fever has to be clearly elicited, because a tonsillitis patient, if he has fever, you think about multiple things. A tonsillitis patient coming to you only with sore throat, throat pain, please ask about fever. If he says he has fever, ask about stomach discomfort, because tonsillitis causes acute gastroenteritis. Number 2, if a tonsillitis patient complains to you of ear pain, please see the ear also, because a tonsillitis patient can present to you with an acute otitis media. A tonsillitis patient coming to you with joint pain, because tonsillitis can cause rheumatoid arthritis, glomerulonephritis, so that anuria or oliguria, decrease urine output, all this there. And very, very rarely a tonsillitis patient, a child coming to you with complaints of tonsils, and you see membranes over the tonsil, you obviously send the patient to a pediatrician for a cardiac evaluation, because infective endocarditis is one dreadful complication of the tonsil patient. If not treated at the right time, you can lose the patient. But again, do not scare the patient saying that, oh, your heart will get affected, so you have to get operated. Nope. You can operate on many patients. You have to talk to the patient, make them comfortable. This is why the history taking is very important. Ask them, okay, do you have a heart problem? No problem at all. Go to this doctor, they will treat you, you take some medicines, you'll be all right. So that's how we deal with these patients. Next slide. History of difficulty in swallowing. So there are two terminologies here. Number 1 is dysphagia. Number 2 is odynophagia. Odynophagia is seldom used now, so we just leave it alone. So dysphagia, you use it for both pain as well as difficulty while swallowing. So is it swallowing for liquids or for solids? So why do we ask this? Because anything in the oropharynx, there will be swallowing difficulty only for solids. Anything beyond that, there will be swallowing difficulty for liquids too, especially in the hypopharynx, that is the upper esophagus and the whole of esophagus. When the patient complains of a water difficulty in drinking water, then you think about something beyond the tonsils. History of halitosis, because of presence of organisms over the tonsil, the patient will have bad breath. Halitosis is nothing but bad breath. Fever, snoring, mouth breathing, recurrent URI, nasal obstruction, and voice change you see in adenoiditis, adenoid hypertrophy, especially in children. If the mother comes and tells you, oh my God, he's snoring at night, he's always opening his mouth, he's having cold running out from his nose, always watery discharge, and his nose is always blocked, he's having a nasal voice. This nasal voice is called as rhinolalia clausa. Okay, the other thing is rhinolalia aperta, that is seen in cleft palate and cleft, all those things, where there is a big aperture. But in case of a rhinolalia clausa, that means the thing is closed, the posterior nares is closed due to some mass effect. Could be because of tonsils, could be because, adenoids, or could be because of any other mass lesions like polyps in the nose. So that is rhinolalia clausa. All right. So hyponasal voice we see there. So all these things, even halitosis fever, we also see in adenoids. When the child mother gives you history of snoring, mouth breathing, recurrent URI, without even examining the patient, you can tell the patient has adenoids. All right. Next slide, please. So again, history of ear block or hard of hearing, you think about serous otitis media. Why? The adenoids block the eustachian tube. So there's collection of fluid there. History of ear pain, ear discharge, in case of tonsillitis or adenoiditis because of acute otitis media, acute separate otitis media, where adenoid could be the septic foci. Tonsil, if it's only present and the patient has ear pain, it's because of rhepidothalgia and not because of infection ascending from the tonsil and going to the ear. Not that it can't go, but it's very rare. History of nausea, abdominal pain, as I told you, it's because of these membranes present over the tonsils and pus follicles present over the tonsils. You're going to swallow saliva, eat food, drink water. Everything is going to go down in your stomach and it's going to make gurgling sounds inside. All right. So this is another history which you take to rule out the complications of tonsillitis. Next slide, please. Past history. Okay. So far we have finished with the tonsils and all the systems. So we come to the past history, which is, does the child has similar complaints in the past? That tells you we are dealing with a chronicity. History of congenital heart disease, bronchial asthma, tuberculosis, epilepsy, diabetes, hypertension. Why everything is necessary is the child or the patient will be already in some medications. You should make sure these medications are not interfering with your treatment and there is no drug interactions present. Okay, and also you should make sure the patients with the bronchial asthma or tuberculosis or diabetes mellitus or hypertension, their status is at present stable so that you can take up for surgery or for any other mode of treatment. Treatment history, any previous surgeries. Why we ask for any previous surgeries is number one, for recurrence. Number two is because already the patient has underwent a surgery under some form of anesthesia, so he or she is not contraindicated for any anesthetic medicines. That gives you a clearer idea that patient can be taken up for a general anesthesia without any complications, that he's still alive in front of you after a big procedure, so you can obviously take him for another procedure. So that is the common thing for any surgeries. And guys, please note this, when you go to medicine, surgery or any other department after this, if the patient gives history of any surgery, please mark it in your examination findings of the surgical scar wherever you see it. A surgical scar missed is equivalent to loss of 50% mark. All right, next slide. Personal history depends upon what type of food he's having, whether he's consuming some substances, smoking, drinking, all those things comes into this. Family history, in case of osteoporosis, we ask about family history. In case of allergic rhinitis, because they all still live in the same house, so could be some environmental factors which is causing allergy, and also sinusitis. Infections, recurrent tonsil infection, that means the water source they are drinking could be infected, so people in the house are getting it very frequently. So that gives a clear family history as to what we are dealing with. Next. Okay, so family history, treatment history, drug history, personal history, everything is important, because when a patient comes to you, he's not a disease, he's a human being. Treat him as a human being and treat him as a whole. Like, your patient might have hyponatremia. Without correcting it, you can't do it. Get your help from your physician friend, or you yourself will know how to correct hyponatremia. Treat it and then treat your patient, so that the patient is comfortable and better at the end. Okay, so coming to the end of this class today, we have to make sure what is history taking. History taking will give you an idea as to a differential diagnosis. You should always have a differentials in your mind. Do not narrow down your mind to, okay, this is a ear case, I will see only CS1, there's going to be perforation, I'm going to just talk about it. No, I might give you a case with a labyrinthitis, I might give you a case with facial nerve palsy, you might have a patient with a mastoiditis. If you miss it, you are not going to go to the next step at all, because you can't miss the complication. So always have a differentials. You can have an automycosis, just a ear block thing. Always think about simple things first. If the patient comes to you with ear block, it could be just wax also. So think about a wax. Then next question, discharge is there. Oh, discharge is there. So wax will not have discharge. So it could be an infection part. So what kind of discharge? It's a pus discharge. Oh, it's virulent discharge or mucopurulent. So we are dealing with something with the middle ear pathology. So okay, do you have pain? Okay, there's an acute infection. You have giddiness. Okay, the labyrinth is involved. That's how a history will help you go to your diagnosis. If you don't take a proper history, your diagnosis is going to be zero. Your examination is going to be really a failure. So always have a differential diagnosis. Have those differential diagnoses in your mind and ask questions. The patient will not give you 100% history. You have to elicit the history. He is going to come to you only with ear pain and discharge. But giddiness, headache, fever, vomiting, double vision, whatever it is, it's what you are going to ask and elicit. Likewise, positive history is very important. I would say more than a positive history, a negative history is very important to rule out other conditions so that you narrow down to your diagnosis. Have a broad perspective, have a broad mind in treating the patients. Don't have a clear-cut value that this is the patient, this is the disease, that's it, I'm going to do. No. Yes, we are there to help you, but you are studying here not to become or not to pass your exams. You're studying here to become good doctors and finally become, practice in your future. So whoever wants to practice, whoever wants to be a good clinician, please talk to your patients, listen to your patients. The patient gives you beautiful values and beautiful information that your textbook will never, ever, ever, ever give you. Trust me, I'm not a bookworm. I'm like, throughout my MBBS, I'm an average student in theory, but all my clinicals, I topped it. From anatomy till my medicine final year. My clinical subject, I was really thorough, but I don't like to write. I don't like to talk much, but I was good in my clinicals. Be a good clinician, because that's what you want to become. If you want, you can also become both a clinician as well as a research-oriented person if you're going to be good in both. So this history will help you for your treatment, management, and you're going to tell the patient, okay, your disease needs these investigations, and then we will go for this surgery. So for that, the history is important. Without a history, there is no examination. Directly, you can't examine a patient without asking. And few take-home points. Next slide is there. Next is thank you. Yeah. So few take-home points which I'm going to tell you right now. Please have in mind. Introduce yourself to the patient. Ask for the patient name. Make them feel comfortable. Ask from where they are. The first 2 minutes is to make sure the patient trusts you completely, and the next 10 minutes is going to be your history, side by side doing an examination of the patient, and the last 3 minutes is to make sure you properly tablet in a paper, and the next 10 minutes is for you to write. If you take 15 to 20 minutes completely for history and examination, 10 minutes you can properly write the answer sheet, and you can properly present in your exams. Any doubts? Any queries?
So guys, we have come to the end of the main topic session. So any doubts and queries so far, please feel free to ask.
Any feedback also is welcome. It's like, so it's so boring, so it's so lengthy, or it could be like, it's okay, we understood a little bit, or we didn't understand a shit. Anything could be here. Just feel free to talk here, so that the next classes can be made a little bit better, because it's the first class me and we thought we'll do it. Okay, thanks to Shan. There's a Google form. Beautiful.
Yes, guys. So we have sent a feedback from as well in the Google chat, Google Meet chat. So kindly feel free to fill it up. So we can get your feedback, and also we can see which other aspect we can improve. Your own suggestions we can also take into consideration for future upcoming series. And so anything else you would like to say, sir, before we make some few announcements?
Okay, nothing. Please stay safe, and please take care of your health. Don't roam around unnecessarily, like Ashwin told in the start of the class. We are seeing a lot of people out without masks, even medical college students. I'm talking about our own college, in and out, people in the hostel as interns. Please take care of yourself, because your life is more important, and the people around you, their life is also more important than yours. All right. So all the very best. Hope today's class was a little bit helpful for you. Any queries or any doubts, you can always contact me through my Insta page there at Vivek Bala 87, or
Yes, sir. So at this moment, we'd like to appreciate two of the volunteers for this from New World Protocol, Ms. Vardhini and Ms. Tulasi Priya, as well, for their constant support and contribution to the 10-second fact break segment of this session. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
So yes, guys, so we are end of this session. So thank you all so much for joining in. And one more announcement we'd like to make is this is just a part one of the series. So we have planned more series and more parts will be coming soon. So once we get into the, right, the pandemic is going on, so we need to get the faculty, and also sir is really busy nowadays. And sir, really thank you so much for coming today. Amidst all the busy schedules and all the emergency cases you're looking, and in COVID duty as well, you took this some time, and you came forward to, you accepted this to do this series.
No issues at all, Yashin. It's always I'm always very happy to teach, but I just don't get time nowadays. Hope to see you guys soon, because I'm that kind of a guy who's like the blackboard teaching method still. I would want to see the patient, want to see the student, and have eye contact and ask them, make them read in front of me, and I'm that kind of person. So maybe this one is a new thing which we've been following for the past 2 years. But yes, I hope it helps you, and it's going to be helpful for you. All the very best. Please study well. Any questions, any doubts, always feel free to ask us. We're all there. Outside, after 4 p.m., I'm always like a friend to all my students. If you have known me before, or if you ask your seniors, they will tell you more about me. So all the very best.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,